911, what's your emergency?
I called a little bit ago. The deputy sheriff saying I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing.
Okay, what is
here now?
Okay, what is the address that you're calling from?
We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Caylee, Caylee Anthony.
Caylee Anthony?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Strangeland podcast. My name is Kenny, and I'm here with my good friend Stefan. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great.
Awesome. So what are we talking about tonight?
So in today's episode, we talk about a highly contentious case about a mother and her missing child. This case was highly talked about in the media and social circles all over the world and still invokes some very mixed opinions today. The death of Caylee Anthony shook America in 2008. The trial of her mother, Caylee Anthony, would later go on to be called the case of the century. This case is filled with mystery and deception, which adds so much depth to the confusion of the disappearance of this 2-year-old Florida girl, known simply by her family as a happy little girl. In this episode, we hope to give you the most objective view of this case that we could manage. That is, until the end of the show, where we'll discuss our personal feelings about the case and the outcomes for all parties concerned. The timeline for these events started in June 2008 with the disappearance of Caylee Anthony and ends in July 2011, when the jury deliberated and came up with their verdict. Some of the events that took place are still unknown to us, which makes for a truly interesting discussion about law, responsibility, and where the blame for the loss of this defenseless 2-year-old child's life should fall. Let's get started.
Caylee Marie Anthony was a 2-year-old American girl who was born on August 9th, 2005. She lived in Orlando, Florida with her mother, Caylee Marie Anthony, and her maternal grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony. You know, from everything I've seen about this case, Caylee was a beautiful, joyous 2-year-old girl. She enjoyed swimming in the family pool, playing in her clubhouse in the family's backyard, and seemed to, greatly be loved by everyone around her.
Caylee Anthony was born on March 19th, 1986 in Warren, Ohio. Caylee was one of 2 children of Cindy and George. Caylee was considered an intelligent, personable young girl with many friends and what many thought to be just an American ordinary family. However, friends say that a pattern of lying began when Caylee was in high school. Cindy and George attended Caylee's graduation along with Caylee's grandparents, only to discover that she was several credits short of graduating. Caylee had stopped attending class towards the end of the year, but led her family to believe she would walk with her graduating class.
Yeah, and so that's something that you sort of see throughout this entire case, so that kind of shows that she started lying, in high school, probably before that, but she became a pathological liar, and she continued to be one, throughout the case. So when she was 19, Caylee gave her family yet another shock. She had put on weight, and her parents suspected she was pregnant. Caylee denied it, claiming that she was a virgin. Months into her pregnancy, she told her parents the truth. The defense will later claim that her parents knew about the pregnancy all along and forced Caylee to hide it. The identity of the baby's father has forever remained a mystery, however. Caylee pointed to different men, including her fiancé, Jesse Grund, as well as a young man she had dated previously who had died in a car crash.
A friend of Caylee's said that she had discussed giving up the baby for adoption, but was discouraged by her mother. For the next few years, Caylee and Caylee lived with her parents, and Grund acted as the baby's father. Grund even believed that Caylee might be his baby, despite knowing that the timing of her conception made it impossible. The DNA test would later find that Grund was not Caylee's father. The identity of Caylee's father remains unknown to this day.
So to start, going through the actual case and going through the actual timeline, we're going to, break down the timeline from when Caylee went missing to the actual trial and everything. So on June 16th, 2008, this is when it starts. Caylee is now just a few months from being 3 years old. Caylee Anthony took Caylee and left the family home after getting into an argument with her mother. George and Cindy Anthony would not see their daughter for 31 days, minus a brief altercation between George and Casey, and they would never see Caylee Anthony alive again. Casey's mother, Cindy, asked repeatedly during the month to see Caylee, but Casey claimed that she was too busy with a work assignment in Tampa, Florida. In the span of the 31 days that Casey spent avoiding her parents, she constantly fed her mother a slew of lies. She would tell her mother that she was taking Caylee to Disney World, SeaWorld, and Universal Studios, while she was actually spending time at her boyfriend Tony Lazzaro's apartment. They have video footage of Casey and Tony going into different stores, including Blockbuster, Walmart, those kind of stores, without Caylee. It is found out through cell phone pings that Casey never actually left Orlando during this entire month. So during this entire month, she lied to her mother multiple times. We're going to go more into depth about those later. She lied to her mother. She avoided her parents at all costs. She does end up seeing her dad once. We'll go over that in a minute. But other than that, she lied the entire time. And cell phone pings put her again in Orlando the entire month. And also, they put her at Tony Lazzaro's apartment.
On June 20th, Caylee Anthony is captured in various photos, partying at Fusion nightclub and participating in hot body contests. Only after 5 days, Caylee would be reported missing. On June 23rd, Anthony Lazzaro helped Casey break into her shed at her parents' house to take a gas can for Casey's car, which had run out of gas. On June 24th, George Anthony called the police to report a break-in and report the gas cans missing. Later this day, he saw Casey at the house and confronted her about taking them. George said that when he went to get them from his daughter's car, she ran past him quickly and opened the trunk and retrieved the gas cans herself, yelling, "Here's your fucking gas cans." George testified that it smelled like gasoline in the car, but he didn't detect any odors.
Yeah, so again, that's some pretty suspicious behavior from Casey. You know, why would she care about her dad going to the trunk of her car, and why would she freak out that bad? Why wouldn't she just go home and ask her parents for gas or money for gas or missing gas or the gas cans, or whatever? So this is that's very suspicious behavior in my opinion. You know, it kind of states that she's obviously doing something wrong.
Yeah, and there sort of seemed to be a rift in between her and her parents. When they talk about each other, her mother seems to love her very much, but at the same time, you can tell there's tension there.
Well, there's tension, and her mother acts like that, but I think there's a lot of tension because when I'm reading interviews or when I'm watching interviews, a lot of people said that Casey resented her mother because her mother tried to act like Caylee's mother. So she tried to act like the baby's mom when she's really just the grandma, and that's probably because she didn't see her daughter fit to be a mother. At least that's she'll never admit that, but that's what it seems like. It seems like the grandmother Cindy never really saw Casey fit to being a mother. So she tried to take Caylee under her wing. So Casey didn't like that ever. You can just tell. So on June 30th, Casey's car is towed from a parking lot after being there for several days. Her purse and a child's car seat are found in the car's back seat. On July 2nd, Casey gets a tattoo on her back saying Bella Vita, which means beautiful life in Italian. When the tattoo artist was questioned, he said that Casey would only talk about her new boyfriend Tony and how much fun they were having. There's no mention of Caylee Anthony at all, and I want to take a break there because that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. So your daughter goes missing. Supposedly, we find out later, of course, that Casey says her daughter was missing there for 30 days. At this point, on July 2nd, her daughter had already been missing for over 2 weeks. About 2 weeks, a couple days after 2 weeks, and she goes to a tattoo artist to get Bella Vita tattooed on her back, which means beautiful life in Italian.
And don't forget the nightclubs, the hot body contest as well.
Yeah, right. You said that. Fusion nightclub. She's going to hot body contest 5 days after Caylee is supposed to be missing. So any mother out there, any mother who has a daughter that's gone missing, 5 days later, any mothers going to hot body contests, going to fusion nightclubs.
Yeah, and one thing is for sure, when you get your picture taken at a nightclub, and she looked carefree, like she really looked like she was having a great time, that's at least suspect.
Yeah, she looks like she is now not a mother. Now she can party like a teenager again, which says it all, I think. But so on July 15th, after finding a notice from the post office for a certified letter on their front door, George and Cindy went to the post office to pick up the letter that stated that Casey's car had been towed and was sitting at an impound yard. The parents went to the impound yard and paid to get the car back. And once George was inside the car, he observes a strong odor emanating from the vehicle. An inspection of the car trunk reveals a plastic bag containing trash. However, George had been in law enforcement for many years, and he thought it smelled like death. He was afraid that when he opened up the trunk, he would find the bodies of either his daughter or his granddaughter. And remember, earlier when George got into the confrontation with Casey about the gas cans, he states that he didn't have another smell. All he smelled was the gas. He didn't actually smell anything bad. Now that he's in the car, weeks after this gas can altercation had happened, he now smells something that he says smelled like death. And he was a cop for many years.
At this point, Cindy and George hadn't seen Caylee in a month and had been getting the runaround from Casey. Now that they find their daughter's car in an impound lot and are told it has been there for over 2 weeks, Cindy tracks down and meets with Casey's friend, Amy Hazinga, who takes her to an apartment where Casey is staying and makes Casey come home. Caylee isn't with her at this point. Casey comes home and tells her parents that the nanny, who Casey has identified as Zanita Fernandez Gonzalez, also known as Zanny, has kidnapped Caylee and would not give her back. She says that Zanny kidnapped Caylee on June 16th, and Casey has been trying to get Caylee back without bringing in law enforcement. That day, July 15th, Casey reports Caylee missing to the Orange County Sheriff's Police Office. For the first time, Casey confirmed with the 911 operator that Caylee had been missing for 31 days. Cindy gets on the line, sounding very distraught, saying that they have found Casey's car and it smelled like a dead body has been in the trunk. Casey, however, sounds very relaxed on the phone, not worried at all.
So, yeah, when Detective Yuri Melik with the Orange County Sheriff's Department began investigating the disappearance of Caylee, he found discrepancies in Casey's signed statement. Although Casey had talked about her, Zanny the nanny had never been seen by Casey's family or friends, and in fact, there was no nanny. Casey also told police that she was working at Universal Studios, a lie she had been telling her parents for years. Investigators brought Casey to Universal Studios on July 16th, the day after all of this came out, and asked her to show them her office. Casey led police around for a while before admitting that she had been fired years before. So Casey went all the way out of the way, wasted investigators' time, actually convinced the front gate person at Universal Studios to let them in, wandered around for a while before saying, "Oh yeah, you got me. I got fired years before." And this next thing is not, I think it should be said, it's not part of the main story, but we find out later that a woman by the name of Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez does actually exist. So someone by that name, who they nicknamed Zanny, does actually exist. But she had never seen Casey in her life, and she has never worked as a nanny. Casey got Zenaida's name off an apartment application Casey had come across and decided to use it in the lie. It should also be said that the real Zenaida was affected by this. For a while, she had been receiving death threats, had people come by her house and threaten her when they found out her name. She says she lost her job and her home simply because of the ridiculous lie that Casey had constructed. Zenaida would later sue Caylee Anthony over defamation.
So, Caylee Anthony was first arrested on July 16, 2008, and was charged with the following day with giving false statements to law enforcement about where she worked. They also charged her with child neglect and obstruction of a criminal investigation for lying to them. The judge denied bail, saying Caylee had shown woeful disregard for the welfare of her child. On July 22nd, after a bond hearing, the judge set bail at $500,000. On August 21st, 2008, 1 month after incarceration, she was released from Orange County Jail after her $500,000 bond was posted by the nephew of California bail bondsman Leonard Padilla in hopes that she would cooperate and Caylee would be found. On August 29th, Caylee Anthony is arrested again on charges of writing 4 checks worth nearly $650 on Amy Huizinga's checking account without her permission. Orange County police say that the charges are unrelated to the investigation. Prosecutors offer Caylee a limited immunity deal related to the false statements given to law enforcement about locating her child. She refuses it soon after. On September 5th, Anthony's parents post a $500,000 bond, and she is released from the county jail into their custody after being fitted with a tracking device on her leg. So now she's been arrested twice and made bail both times for a total of $1 million. Her family is forking up money to get her out of jail.
Her family forked up $500,000. And then $500,000, like Stefan said, was posted by the nephew of California bail bondsman, Leonard Padilla. So that's really weird that he did that. It said in hopes that she would cooperate and Caylee would be found. Yeah, good luck. But, so yeah, a lot of money is being spent just on getting her out. But not for very long, because on October 14th, Caylee Anthony was indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to the police. She was arrested. Judge John Jordan ordered that she be held without bond, thank God. On October 21st, the charges of child neglect were dropped against Caylee. According to the state attorney's office, because the evidence proved that the child was deceased, the state sought an indictment on the legally appropriate charges. On October 28th, Anthony was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecution will go for the death penalty.
On 3 separate occasions in early August 2008, meter reader Roy Krunk called the police about a suspicious object he found in a forested area near the Anthony residence. In the first instance, he was directed by the sheriff's office to call the tip line, which he did, receiving no return call at all. It's a little scary and terrifying. Mm-hmm. On the second instance, he again called the sheriff's office. Eventually, he was met by 2 police officers and reported to them what he had seen and what it appeared to be a skull near a gray bag. So on that occasion, the officer conducted a short search, looked around, did what he could, but stated he found nothing at all, nothing out of the ordinary. On December 11, 2008, Krunk again called the police. This guy knew he had seen something, and he wasn't giving up. They searched and found the remains of a child in a trash bag. Over the next 4 days, more bones were found in the wooded area near the spot where the remains initially had been discovered. On December 19, 2008, medical examiner Dr. Jan Gavargula confirmed that the remains found were those of Caylee Anthony. The death was ruled a homicide.
Yep. Okay. So real quick about Roy Krunk. So we just went over. They found the body of Caylee Anthony, and you won't see. So Stefan said on 3 separate occasions, meter reader Roy Krunk called police about a suspicious object that he saw.
He was persistent.
Yeah, he was persistent. And this, on the 3rd time, they found the body where he originally had said it. So he called in August, only a month after Caylee went missing, or 2 months after she'd been missing. 1 month after they found out, after it was admitted that she had been missing. So only a month, and nothing was done. They did a short search. Of a short search of the area, didn't find anything. But this is where the body was found. And I want to say that, this will be brought up later. This will be brought up later again. But when the body was found, stems were growing into the bones of Caylee, which means she had been sitting there for months, which means in August, that body was there. Kaylee's body was there in August. So they either did just a really bad search, they were very lazy about it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if they had found Kaylee's body in August, everything about this case would have been different. And the defense later will go on and say that Roy Krunk had the body in his possession and would take the body back in December because he realized he would get a reward money. So in August he called and sort of was like, oh, whatever, it didn't actually happen. Then he took the body and then returned the body to the area in December and called again. That's what the defense wants you to believe. However, they will never show any evidence that ever happened. That is just a bogus story they came up with.
Yeah, that's a bold assertion to make about something.
Yeah, well, the defense, everything the defense says, which we'll get into that later. We shouldn't get into that too early, but everything the defense says is bogus and bold and shows no evidence and everything. But, again, so Roy Krunk called in August saying he saw a suspicious object, which ended up being found in December as Caylee Anthony. And if she had been found in August, this whole case would have been different.
Yeah, and really the point is that, like, this guy knew what he saw, right? Like, he definitely knew something was wrong. He was persistent about it. He knew there was a body in that forest, and
yeah, I mean, he knew he saw something. He knew enough to call the police. And the first time, nothing happened. No return call. Second time, they did a very short search of the area, found nothing. And so that's ridiculous.
It seems weird to me that the police would do such a short search because, especially that close to
it was like a block away from the house. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's absurd.
So the body is found. Let's do a short recap over everything we've already talked about. So Caylee went missing in June, according to Caylee Anthony. It took Casey a month, and being tracked down by her mother took her a month to admit that Caylee was even missing. And let's just admit, if the grandmother Cindy had never gone and tried to track down Casey, what would have happened? I mean, it could have been years before anything came out about this. So it took her a month and being tracked down to admit it, and that was in July. Kaylee's body is found in December, so 6 months. 6 months after Caylee went missing in June, her body is found. Dry bones. There's nothing found but just completely dry bones of Caylee. And, through the month that Caylee was missing, she's out partying. She's getting pictures taken of her at a hot body contest. She's getting a beautiful life tattoo in Italian on her back. No mention of Caylee. She's seen on multiple video cameras in stores with her boyfriend Tony Lazzaro, and Caylee is not there with her. There is zero evidence that she left Orlando, and there is zero evidence that she had Caylee with her ever in any of those times. She's been arrested 3 times now, twice. Once for lying to police officers, once for a quote unquote unrelated charge. Which was a checking charge.
Hot checks.
And the third time was for murder.
So there were around 400 pieces of evidence presented. A strand of hair was recovered from the trunk of Casey's car, which was microscopically similar to the hair taken from Caylee Anthony's hairbrush. The strand showed root branding, in which hair roots form a dark band after death. And so under the microscope, it's very obvious. You can tell there's a big dark band around the hair follicle itself.
Yeah, it just shows decomposition has already started.
Right, which of course is consistent with a dead body being in the trunk. On Friday, October 24th, 2008, a forensic report by David Arpad Voss judged that the results from an air sampling performed in the trunk showed the chemical compounds, quote, being consistent with a decompositional event, unquote, based on the presence of 5 key chemical compounds out of 400 possible chemical compounds that Dr. Voss's research group considered typical of decomposition. Investigators stated that the trunk smelled strongly of human decomposition, but human decomposition is not specified on the laboratory scale. Dr. Voss's group also stated that there was a large amount of chloroform found in the air in the car's trunk. In October 2009, officials released 700 pages of documents related to the Anthony investigation, including records of Google searches, which included the search for neck breaking, how to make chloroform, and also how to make household weapons was actually one of the Google searches they came up with. And it is to be noted that this was on the computer on Caylee Anthony's profile that is password protected. So this evidence is presented to the prosecutors as evidence of a crime. Witness John Dennis Bradley's software developed for computer investigations was used by the prosecution to indicate that Caylee Anthony had conducted extensive computer searches on the word chloroform 84 times, and to suggest that Anthony had planned to commit murder. Again, Google searches for how to make chloroform were conducted on a computer in the Anthony house. It's then stated that there's actually no way to be sure it was Caylee Anthony, anyone, they can't prove without reasonable doubt that, it was, in fact, Caylee Anthony to perform these searches. But it was on her profile that was password protected.
Yeah, and in trial, Caylee Anthony's the prosecutor for the state would also, she would say that, Jordan and Cindy were both at work during that time. But again, it's hard to prove that. It's hard to say, if they were at work, if they weren't at work. But like Stefan said, it was done. Those searches were conducted under a profile for Caylee that was password protected. So 3 strips of duct tape were found on Caylee's skull when her remains were found. The exact same duct tape was found at the Anthony household. When Caylee's remains were found, they were in a highly decomposed state. However, her teeth were still in her skull and her jawbone was still in place and connected. This shows that duct tape was placed over her mouth before she started to decompose, as the duct tape kept her jawbone and teeth intact. Normally, there is nothing to keep the jawbone intact. This is a very strong indication that Caylee suffocated also. They were not able to find any type of major trauma to the skull, because she was dumped at very early stages of decomposition. Roots from the forest area had begun to grow and intertwine with her bones, said that earlier, which would have meant that she was sitting in the same place decomposing for months. And back to the duct tape part real fast. So they can prove that the duct tape was over her mouth. The defense will bring someone in and say that they can't prove the duct tape was over her mouth. The duct tape was found on the skull, on the front of the skull, but they couldn't prove that the duct tape was over Caylee's mouth. But you can, because if a 2-year-old girl is sitting out in the woods for 6 months, okay, or even 5 months, or whatever, any amount of months, her jaw, there's nothing to keep the jawbone in place. It will come apart during decomposition. Her jawbone and teeth will come out. Those are baby teeth. They come right out. They're not staying in her skull. So something kept that together. And we know that for a fact. So we know that duct tape was over her mouth. And, there were 3 strips of it. So why would you put 3 strips of duct tape over her mouth, right? It's probably also covering her nose. And it should be stated that a toxicology was done on Caylee Anthony, but she had, like I said before, she'd been sitting and decomposing for months. There was obviously no blood. There was no tissue. There was no marrow in the cavities in her bones. Her bones were completely dry. There's nothing, just bones. A skeleton bone after 5 or 6 months of decomposing in a forest area, a 2-year-old girl will become just completely dry bones. They looked for chloroform, and it didn't come up positive. But again, that makes sense. There's no way chloroform is going to come up in this body.
Especially after 6 months.
There's
no way that's happening.
What, 2 months? Like 2 days? 2 or 3 days, you'll be able to find chloroform.
Right.
A week later, when you have marrow, and you have blood, and you have tissue, even a week, when you still have all of that stuff, you won't find it because it will be gone. It doesn't have a half-life of more than 3 days. So there's no way it would be found in your body after months of decomposition. And I'll say that is a big, to me, that's a huge part of what went wrong with this. It's very unlucky. If they had found her body in August, when Roy Krunk first called, if they had found her body in August, more than likely everything would be different because there would probably still be marrow in the cavities of her bones. There'd still be tissue. There might be blood samples. There might be something.
Most definitely.
6 months of decomposing in a forest area, you have nothing. So they can't prove anything.
The trial began on May 24th, 2011 at the Orange County Courthouse, with Judge Belvin Perry presiding. In the opening statements, lead prosecutor Diana Drain Burdick described the story of the disappearance of Caylee Anthony day by day. The prosecution alleged an intentional murder and sought the death penalty against Caylee Anthony, which even at the very least, death penalty seems like a very strong. They were very pointed in what they were trying to get done here.
Yeah, they saw the death penalty before they found the body because they arrested her for murder before they found Kaylee's body. And when they arrested her, they said that they would seek out the death penalty. So, yeah, you're right. That's very early to do something like that. They didn't even have a body. Well, you'll find out if you go through more cases, it doesn't work out that well most of the time.
Yeah, prosecutors stated that Caylee used chloroform to render her daughter unconscious before putting duct tape over her nose and mouth to suffocate her and possibly to quiet her if there was a struggle, and left Kaylee's body in the trunk of her car a few days before disposing of it, which would account for the decompositional material that was found. They categorized Anthony as a party girl who killed her daughter to free herself from parental responsibility and enjoy her personal life. The defense, in this case led by Jose Baez, claimed in the opening statements that Caylee drowned accidentally in the family's pool on June 16, 2008, and was found by George Anthony, who told Caylee she would spend the rest of her life in jail for child neglect and then proceed to cover up Kaylee's death. Baez argued this is why Caylee Anthony went on with her life and failed to report the incident for 31 days. He alleged that it was the habit of a lifetime for Caylee to hide in her pain and pretend nothing was wrong because she had been sexually abused by her father, George Anthony, since she was 8 years old, and her brother Lee had also made advances toward her. Baez also questioned whether Roy Krunk, the meter reader who actually found the bones, had removed them from another location, and further alleged that the police department's investigation was compromised by their desire to feed the media frenzy about this innocent child's murder, rather than a more mundane drowning. He admitted that Caylee had lied about being there, a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez.
Yeah, so when I first, put that down, and when I was first kind of going over that defense, that whole statement is just utterly ridiculous. So like you said in the beginning, there was zero evidence. I mean, there was zero. The defense backs up none of their claims. If you look through trial, the defense does not back up a single claim. There's not even circumstantial evidence of a drowning, honestly. I mean, I think the only circumstantial evidence of a drowning is the fact that, Cindy stated at one point on June 16th that on June 16th that she saw the ladder to her pool down. That's it. That is the only circumstantial evidence I could find to back up the defense's story of a drowning. Nothing. And also, there is zero evidence that Casey was ever molested by her dad, ever. There's nothing. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence that Lee, her brother, made any sexual advances on her. There's nothing. There's zero evidence. There's not even circumstantial evidence that any of that happened. The defense backs up none of their claims. And the prosecution story sounds completely fine. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to have happened. The story that they line out sounds fine. The story that the defense lines out is completely bogus, and they know it's bogus.
Yeah, it's a case filled with molestation, cover-up, and it sounds like a bad movie, honestly.
Yeah, it's such a bullcrap thing to say, Her dad, George, is sitting there in the trial, and they're just making this stuff up. The defense literally just made up this story. I think it's completely obvious. And while doing research for this trial, I watched an interview, actually with you. We both watched an interview of one of the jurors for this trial. Mm-hmm. And honestly, she went on this interview about a year or so after the trial, something like that, a while after the trial ended. And she went on to make a claim and try to bring good publicity to the jury. And she ended up making herself and the jury look awful. She said that, in her opinion, it was easier to get from A to B with the defense's story, and I find that utterly ridiculous. I don't see how that's even possible.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, you can get, with the prosecutor's story, you can get from A to B really easy. I mean, it's very, very easy. There's tons of circumstantial evidence to point towards that. There's no evidence, and the defense's story doesn't even make any sense. You can just tell it's been completely fabricated and just made up out of thin air.
Yeah, and you can tell the disappearance of Caylee really resonated with her grandparents.
Yeah.
Like they felt scared and worried. And now, as far as her mother, I don't know if the same could be said. I mean, the tattoo, the partying, it just seems like odd behavior.
The behavior that Casey had after her child went missing does not match up with any other mother who's had their child gone missing ever.
Yeah, it's not consistent. It really is.
It's not consistent at all.
And this is never explained at all. No one. I mean, obviously she didn't speak for herself in court, but this is never addressed.
Yeah, and like you said, her grandparents did seem pretty emotional about everything on the 911 call that we played for you. On that 911 call, Cindy Anthony is talking to 911, and she's going crazy. She's distraught. And then Casey gets on the line, and she just sounds like, oh, yeah, my daughter went missing for 31 days, and I was just trying to do something else without contacting law enforcement. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, she didn't want to get law enforcement involved.
Why not? Why would you not tell anybody? She didn't even tell her friends. She didn't. There's no evidence that she went to do anything else. No, she didn't go through law enforcement, but she also didn't tell her friends that her daughter was missing.
Like that to me is sort of the most incriminating act of. I mean, that's sort of the most leading evidence to the case is really that she had no like the judge who originally arrested her said that she just had willful disregard for her child at all.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons she was arrested the first time. So prosecutors called George Anthony as their first witness, and in response to their question, he denied having sexual abuse with his daughter Casey, of course, and George testified he did not smell anything resembling human decomposition in Casey's car when she visited him on June 24th, which is when she visited him and he got his gas cans back. But he did smell something similar to human decomposition when he picked the car up on July 15th. Cindy Anthony, the grandmother, the mother of Casey, testified that her comment to 911 that Casey's car smelled like someone had died was just a figure of speech. A figure of speech. What do you think about that?
Well, So actually, really, Cindy Anthony is actually really interesting in this story to me. I don't know, for some reason she seems woefully ignorant about everything. But at the same time, it's hard not to look at her and see how much love she actually has for her daughter. And listen, this is just me saying it. This doesn't mean anything, but I think Cindy knew exactly what she was saying. I think Cindy's a smart lady, but I also think that Cindy would do anything for her child, and if that means covering up or covering her daughter's behind, then that's what she's gonna do.
Yeah, so we've already kind of gone over. We're not going to go that far and that deep into the trial because we've gone over evidence, we've gone over the story, and that's basically what they do in the trial. We can say that they go back and forth about things. They go back and forth about sexual abuse from George. They go back and forth about the story, about the drowning, about evidence for the drowning, which there is none, about evidence, in the prosecution's case. I'll say that the defense did bring in a doctor to go against the prosecutor's doctor, Dr. Jan, and this doctor's name was Dr. Werner Spitz, and this was a complete and total, smoke and mirrors attempt by the defense. This doctor said, that Dr. Jan's testimony didn't make any sense because she didn't open up the head, the skull. She didn't open up the skull, but the entire body, they were just dry bones. So you could see right into the skull. There was no need to open it up. The prosecution messed up right here. And during this trial, I would say the prosecution messed up on a lot of things. They didn't combat a lot of what the defense was saying, this being one of them. Dr. Jan never got back onto the stand to explain her position, to explain that there was no point in opening up the skull, that she could see right into it. They could see everything. And in fact, when the defense's doctor, Dr. Werner Spitz, came onto the stand, he said that he broke the skull. When he opened up the skull, it broke. So, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. It was complete smoke and mirrors. He was saying that autopsy didn't make any sense, but it was ridiculous. Which it was, the entire defense is smoke and mirrors in my opinion. But
on July 3rd, 2011, Judge Perry rules that during closing arguments, the defense could argue that there was a drowning involved in the death of Caylee Anthony because there was sufficient evidence of that, but could not argue that George had sexually abused Casey. Prosecution does an hour and a half of closing arguments, offering a timeline of events and asserting that Casey intentionally suffocated Caylee to death by putting 3 pieces of duct tape over her face. The alleged motive was that the child interfered with her partying lifestyle and spending time with her boyfriend. The prosecution states that the defense story of Caylee drowned and George encouraged Casey to cover up the accident made no sense. The defense counters with 4 hours of arguments, insisting that there was no proof of how Caylee actually died, challenging the prosecutor's most important evidence as fantasy and emphasizing the reasonable doubt that Casey killed Caylee. It again insists that after the child drowned, Casey panicked and George Anthony made the death look like a murder and that he was the one who put the body in the nearby woods.
yeah, and so, in this case, we kind of already said it, I kind of already said it. I agree with the prosecution in this. I mean, there really isn't much evidence that drowning occurred. And there's zero evidence, of course, at the sexual abuse. So the judge said you can't even use that. That's just ridiculous. You can't even use it. And then the prosecution's story just makes sense. The prosecution states the defense's story that Caylee drowned and George encouraged Casey to cover up the accident. It made no sense, and I totally agree. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no backing to it at all. The defense, it just seems like they just made up a story. It just seems like they just made up a story and said, "Okay, we're going to go with this. I know it sounds fictional. I know it sounds like a short story, but let's do it anyways." And hopefully hopefully the jury agrees with us, and they did.
And they did.
Yep. So On July 4th, 2011, one day later, prosecutors Jeff Ashton and Linda Drain Burdick present a rebuttal to the defense closing, telling jurors that the forensic evidence had proved their case, while the defense made claims they did not prove. The case then goes to jury. Judge Belvin Perry Jr. issues final instructions to the jury. About 10 hours of deliberation, the jury acquits Caylee Anthony of all felony charges, which, again, were first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse, but convicts her of all 4 misdemeanor charges of giving false information to a police officer. Judge Perry sentences Caylee to 1 year in jail and $1,000 in fines for each of the 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The judge orders all sentences to run consecutive to each other with credit for time served. Now remember, she's already been in jail. Based on 3 years credit for time served, plus additional credit for good behavior, her release date is set for July 17th, 2011. 10 days after the sentencing. So 10 days later, she is out. Caylee Anthony appeals convictions for providing false information to a law enforcement officer. And on July 17th, just like the sentencing said, Caylee Anthony is released from jail at 12:10 a.m. with $537 in cash. So why was she found not guilty? Why did the jury find her not guilty? That's the main question. So that's the last thing we're really going to go over. Well, why did this happen? Because everyone thinks she is guilty. Everyone thinks she is guilty. Every single person. I mean, through all of my internet research, I may have found one YouTube comment saying, "Oh, maybe she's not guilty." And it didn't seem like trolling either. It was a real comment. So
It does seem like the majority of people definitely think that she at least knows what happened.
Well, I think that too. I mean, I think that she at least knows what happened. Personally, I'll go ahead and say it. I think she probably did it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Honestly, she did it. There's enough circumstantial evidence. Also, there's more than just circumstantial evidence. Really, there's, it's like the jury wanted a video of her choking Caylee out in a Blockbuster parking lot. The jury wanted a smoking gun, which is fine. It always works better if you have a smoking gun in a case. But the problem with this is it doesn't always happen.
Well, to me, the most convincing thing too is that everyone knows that Caylee was a liar. She went. She wouldn't even give up on her lies until she was at the moment where she couldn't lie anymore. And she's lucky, with the FBI investigating her at Disneyland, they were able to catch her, And in this specific case, there just wasn't enough evidence to pin it on her with reasonable doubt that,
But so, yeah, we had a conversation about it. And, it was one of those things where I said that the thing is, and I feel like the jury said that they thought that, okay, we know for a fact that this was a homicide. We know that she died. Mm-hmm. I mean, every single piece of evidence, how she was found in a bag, in the laundry bag with duct tape on her, in the woods, it is a homicide.
Right near the house.
Right near the house, it's a homicide. The problem that the jury had is that they could not just say that Caylee Anthony did it. They cannot say that Caylee Anthony did it. The problem with that is, I could say that, yeah, maybe her boyfriend did it. Maybe a friend of hers did it. Maybe Caylee said, okay, maybe Caylee talked to someone, her boyfriend, and said, look, can you do this? I'm tired of this, blah, 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 blah. Can you kill my daughter and help me dispose of her body? The problem with that is the car. If the car wasn't found, I would probably say, there's not enough evidence. That I would probably find her not guilty just to be safe.
Right.
The problem is they found her car.
And the hair in the trunk.
The decomposing hair in the trunk that matched Caylee. The smell of chloroform in the trunk, the smell of the decomposing, the smell of death in the trunk.
And then compared with the Google searches.
That, we know we pretty much know they were done by her. Cindy's going to log on to one of Casey's
Well, she actually did claim that she meant to search for chloroform, which is what she said in court is what she meant to search for.
Yeah.
And she accidentally, or it auto-corrected to chloroform.
But this was done on Casey's, password-protected account.
Right. And a question I would ask her is, why do you want to make chloroform?
Yeah, or why do you... Yeah. I mean, whatever. Even if that happened. The problem is it happened a lot. And also, there was the neck-breaking Google searches. And this should be said, this was not shown in trial because this did not come out till after trial. But a Google search for foolproof suffocation also came out. And, she probably suffocated. I think the prosecution's probably correct. Some people think that... This is a big theory. Some people think that Casey accidentally killed Caylee because she was trying to keep her quiet. She was trying to put her to sleep. And I think it's a possibility. Maybe she gave her chloroform to try to keep her quiet and keep her, try to put her to sleep. And she messed up, gave her too much, and killed her. But that doesn't necessarily explain the duct tape. Now, unless she was just trying to use duct tape on her to keep her quiet. But that doesn't make much sense to me. Why is the duct tape there? Why are there 3 strips?
Especially if she's passed out from chloroform.
Yeah. In my opinion, she passed out from chloroform because that's what they gave her. And then they put duct tape over her mouth and nose to suffocate her to death. She died. She was put in the trunk of the car. There was the smell of chloroform, smell of death, in the hair, in the trunk. She's put in the trunk. We know that she was in that trunk. That car belonged to Casey, right? I mean, that's just too much evidence. That's to say that maybe the boyfriend did it, but they put Caylee in the back of her mom's car, in the trunk of Casey's car. Even if the boyfriend did it, you shouldn't have done that because that to me looks like real evidence. Yeah, and that's still, even if he did it, that she knew. Caylee Anthony doesn't lose any responsibility because someone else killed her child. She's still, she's still responsible. I don't understand how no child neglect charges were actually able to go through. So the reason why that happened, they didn't originally go through, remember, but they took them off because there was a different judge, not Judge Perry. It was a different judge in the beginning. And he took them off because he thought there was sufficient evidence that Caylee was dead. And so because of that, they took off the charges of child abuse. But what's messed up is that a 2-year-old girl is dead and missing. And somehow no one's responsible. Her mother is not responsible. Her mother, who was watching her, who took her from Kaylee's house on June 16th, and she goes missing, and then she's found dead 6 months later. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Casey didn't do it. It just does not matter. She should be held responsible. She is the mother. I have a 2-year-old stepdaughter who I love, and if she went missing, holy crap. I mean, you don't think that Stephanie would be found? Something would happen. It's just like, no, that doesn't happen. A 2-year-old is dead. Responsibility has to be made. And I can't, And the jury can't place the blame on anybody. Yeah, and the jury said at some point that they were heartbroken not to give her a guilty sentence. Did you read that? Yeah. Yeah. How? It's like they had to have 100% evidence. So it's like they don't. It's like they don't understand the meaning of beyond reasonable doubt. I also feel like it's a combination of the right laws being put in place as well. So Kaylee's law was actually made after this case, and it just stated that if a child isn't reported a couple days after going missing, that's a fucking. It's a crime. You can't do that. You're not allowed to neglect children regardless and then not want to get police involved. That's not how real life is. And of course, there is you can't go back and say, okay, we're going to arrest her again. You can't do that. That's I believe it's called double jeopardy. You can't arrest and try the same person for the same crime twice. That's just, you can't do that, right? And so the outside of the courtroom, all the spectators that were all going crazy, When they found out she was found not guilty, they all started chanting appeal like morons. I'm sorry, but it's like they don't understand the justice system at all. You don't appeal that, and also they can't arrest her and try her again because they'd be double jeopardy. You can't do that. And so now that they have this law, Caylee's law, that is put in place for this exact reason. The person that benefits or that made this law come into place it's not being used against her because it can't be. So again, the jury. I think the reason she was found not guilty is a mix of things. It's a mix of very bad luck that they didn't find the body of Caylee Anthony for 6 months. That is tremendously unlucky.
Time was imperative.
Yeah, it really is because they would have had much more evidence. I think the jury was a bad combination. I think the prosecutors, we talked about how they arrested her and they sought the death penalty right away.
Right.
So that shows a lot of confidence that they can get a guilty. You do not do that. They arrested her and sought the death penalty before they found the body, which means that they had a lot of confidence. And then that confidence shows in trial as well because they didn't try as hard as they could have. In my opinion, a lot of this was the prosecutors just not doing a good job cross-examining.
Right.
The defense, as bogus as a story as they had, they cross-examined very well. And so that went into their favor. And I think, honestly, the prosecution just underestimated this jury. We see cases all the time that, you see cases all the time where they're found just on circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, they couldn't pin it on her. They couldn't do it that. As much as they tried, and as much of as bad as the situation looked, they couldn't pin her with the murder.
And I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake on the jury's part. I also think it was a big deal that they didn't want to, convict her and seek the death penalty based on circumstantial evidence. And I get that.
I don't think they should have went for the death penalty.
I don't think they should have either. That was a big mistake by the prosecution.
I think there's a good possibility that this case would have ended differently if they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I think so as well. And, again, I want to say, I don't think I've really said this. I don't agree with convicting someone of the death penalty based on circumstantial evidence. And even if the jury doesn't, they say they're not going to, take that into consideration, it's impossible not to. It's impossible not to take that into consideration. It's just impossible not to, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to do it. There have been cases, I can't remember the exact name of this person, but in the early 1900s, there was a case where someone was convicted of a murder, and they were sentenced to death. They were hung, and then 10 or 15 years later, they found out that he didn't actually do it. There are tons of those cases.
Oh yeah,
and
dude.
That's the issue. When there's only circumstantial evidence, it's like,
Yeah, and there really is tons of cases where people have served the death penalty, but also spent most of their life in prison and were totally guilty, totally innocent.
Yeah, and so by making this a death penalty case, prosecutors knew they were far more likely to end with juries predisposed to favoring the prosecution. Like I said, potential jurors in capital case must under oath state that they don't oppose a death penalty and that they could impose it, if the case warranted. What the prosecution failed to take into account was that in death penalty cases, jurors, perhaps unconsciously, require a high standard of proof. I said that this is illegal technically. Jurors cannot take that into account, but it is impossible not to. Even unconsciously, they can do it, just because that's how people think. This is how you think. So that was a big misstep. We've said it, many times, but the prosecution misstepped by by seeking the death penalty.
Okay, guys, so we've discussed the facts with you. This case was sort of tough for us to stay as objective as possible, but we feel like we tried to do it some justice here, and I hope it was enjoyable for you guys. If you have any questions about this case, let us know. You can email us at strangelandpodcast@gmail.com.
It's actually the Strangeland
Oh,
podcast.
I'm sorry, the Strangeland Podcast at
Sorry,
gmail.com.
Yeah, and
I
our
get it.
our
It's
website
new.
our website is strangelandpod.com. So just go there. We're at Facebook at the Strangeland Podcast. Check it out. Right now we are on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. We're also due to be on Stitcher very soon, probably within the next few days. We're also on SoundCloud if you look up the Strangeland Podcast. And we're going to be on a bunch of, within the next 2 weeks, by the time the next episode comes out, we're going to be on a bunch of platforms. But right now, you can already find us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and soon Stitcher.
Stitcher, here we come.
Stitcher Radio. I can't think of the other platforms, but yeah, there's a few other ones we're going to be on soon.
Good night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and hope you come back in the future.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Hey, Kenny, let me ask you a question. Would you eat a sandwich with bacon, tomatoes, and ketchup?
Bacon, tomatoes, and ketchup?
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I'd eat one of those sandwiches. Maybe next week.
Well, we'll find out.
All right, later, guys.
In your